The 60-story climb to the Apex Innovations headquarters was a journey into a world built of glass and ambition. From this perch in Midtown Manhattan, the city sprawled below like a circuit board, a breathtaking panorama that no one inside ever seemed to notice. The office itself was a testament to cold, minimalist success, a realm of brushed steel, polished concrete, and an almost surgical silence, broken only by the determined clicking of keyboards. Employees moved with the calculated precision of chess pieces, their faces illuminated by the glow of monitors displaying stock tickers and performance metrics. It was a place of immense material wealth and a profound poverty of human connection, where every interaction was a transaction and the air itself felt thin, pressurized by the relentless pursuit of more. In this kingdom of opulence, human warmth was the rarest and most undervalued of commodities. At the center of this world, its undisputed king was Julian Vance. At 42, he wore his success like a suit of armor, impeccably tailored, impossibly expensive, and designed to keep everyone at a distance. A luxury watch gleamed on his wrist, a constant reminder of the time he believed was being wasted. His posture was rigid, his expression a carefully constructed mask of control and superiority. Today, that mask was cracking. In his hand, he held an envelope with foreign postmarks, its contents a document written entirely in Hungarian. It was a notice about an inheritance from his grandmother, the only person who had ever shown him real affection, and the deadline to respond was closing in fast. His voice, clipped and impatient, cut through the office as he berated his assistants, whose frantic searches for a translator were proving useless. In the periphery of this storm of corporate panic, a figure moved with a quiet, almost invisible grace. Elena Nowak, clad in the simple, worn-out uniform of the nightly cleaning crew, was wiping down the vast glass walls of the conference room. Her hands were calloused from years of labor, but her deep brown eyes missed nothing, observing the unfolding chaos with a silent intelligence no one had ever bothered to acknowledge. For a moment she hesitated, a ghost in a world that refused to see her. Then, gathering a courage born of deep-seated knowledge, she stepped forward. Her voice was barely a whisper against the sharp edge of Julian's frustration. "Sir, excuse me," she began, her gaze steady. "I think I can help. I can read Hungarian." The room fell into a sudden disbelieving silence. The silence was shattered not by a response, but by a sound far more cruel: laughter. One of the executives let out a loud, derisive bark of a laugh, and the others exchanged mocking glances, their smirks communicating a shared contempt for the absurdity of the situation. The cleaner, offering to solve a problem that had stumped their entire high-powered team. The humiliation was a physical blow, a wave of heat that washed over Elena's face, yet she stood her ground, her dignity an invisible shield. It's in these moments of profound injustice, when a person's worth is so casually dismissed, that a story truly finds its heart. If you believe in the power of these quiet victories, subscribing is a way to ensure more voices like hers are heard. Julian, however, heard nothing but the ticking clock. Ignoring the snickers of his subordinates, driven by a raw desperation and a flicker of morbid curiosity, he strode over to Elena and thrust the document into her hands. It wasn't an act of kindness. It was the last move of a man with nothing left to lose. As Elena's fingers, worn from labor, gently held the crisp paper, a transformation occurred. The hesitant, almost apologetic posture she had worn, like a second skin, dissolved, replaced by a quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from her very core. Her eyes, which had always been downcast, now scanned the Hungarian text with an academic's focus. When she began to speak, her voice was no longer a whisper, but a clear, steady melody that filled the sterile conference room with an unexpected warmth. She translated the legal jargon with precision, But when she reached the personal notes from Julian's grandmother, her tone softened, perfectly capturing the blend of love, pride, and gentle worry woven into the old woman's script. The room, once filled with derisive noise, was now held captive by a profound, disbelieving silence. Julian stood frozen, the words hitting him not as a translation, but as a direct echo from his past. He heard his grandmother's voice, a sound he hadn't realized he'd forgotten, speaking the affectionate nicknames of his childhood. The formal, yet loving phrases transported him back to a small, cramped kitchen that always smelled of paprika and baking bread. He saw her hands, dusted with flour, and felt the comforting weight of her arm around his shoulders. The memory was so visceral, so powerful, that it momentarily shattered the cold, calculated persona he had spent 2 decades building. He was no longer Julian Vance, CEO of Apex Innovations. He was just Julie, a little boy listening to the only person who had ever made him feel unconditionally loved. The foundation of his world trembled beneath his feet. The executives exchanged bewildered glances, their earlier arrogance melting into a puddle of confusion and shock. This was an anomaly they couldn't process, a variable that didn't fit into their predictable world of spreadsheets and profit margins. Marcus Thorne, a senior vice president who prided himself on his worldly sophistication, decided this had to be a trick. He needed to reassert the natural order of things. In a condescending tone, he muttered a complex financial query in German, a language he often used to impress clients. He didn't expect a real answer. He expected to expose her, to prove she was a fraud who had simply gotten lucky with a single, obscure language. It was a petty act of intellectual bullying, designed to put her back in her place. Elena paused her translation for only a heartbeat. She lifted her gaze from the document, her deep brown eyes meeting Marcus's with an unnerving calm. In flawless, corporate German, she not only answered his question, but also politely corrected a minor syntactical error he had made, suggesting a more precise term. The quiet authority in her voice was a sonic boom in the silent room. Before Marcus could recover, another executive, a woman from the acquisitions team, tried her luck with a sentence in Russian. Elena responded just as effortlessly, her fluency and perfect accent leaving no room for doubt. The truth settled over the room with crushing weight. The woman they saw as nothing more than a janitor was a brilliant polyglot, a linguistic master hidden in plain sight. The revelation struck Julian with the force of a physical blow, a burning shame that crept up his neck and flushed his face. He watched the stunned, humbled expressions on the faces of his top executives and saw a sickening reflection of his own blindness. He had built his entire career on his supposed ability to identify and acquire valuable assets, yet the most intellectually gifted person in his entire company had been right under his nose, scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans, and he had looked straight through her. His superiority complex shattered, revealing the scared, insecure boy he once was. It is in these humbling moments of clarity, when our own prejudices are laid bare, that we find the capacity for real growth. If you believe in the power of such transformative stories, subscribing helps us continue to bring them to light. Later that evening, long after the last of his shaken executives had departed, Julian dismissed the rest of the cleaning crew, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. He asked Eleanor to stay, gesturing toward one of the expensive leather chairs at the head of the conference table. The simple invitation felt like a monumental shift in the corporate cosmos. For a long moment, he just looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. "Please," he said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "Tell me your story." Eleanor hesitated, then began to speak of a life he could barely imagine. She described her years as a distinguished professor of comparative linguistics at the University of Sarajevo, a life rich with intellectual debate, cherished colleagues, and the joy of mentoring bright young minds. Her narrative then took a dark turn, her voice losing its academic precision and taking on a hollowed-out quality as she spoke of the war. She didn't dwell on the violence, but on the losses that followed. Her home, her husband, her career, her very identity. She recounted her harrowing escape and her arrival in the United States as a refugee, filled with a desperate hope that was slowly ground down by reality. Her prestigious degrees and publications meant nothing here. She was met with a wall of bureaucratic indifference and suspicion. Potential employers saw a middle-aged woman with a thick accent and an unverifiable history, not the brilliant scholar she was. The only door that opened was the one to the service entrance of buildings like this. As he listened, Julian felt an uncomfortable resonance with her story of being dismissed and undervalued. He was suddenly back in his own childhood, a scholarship kid at a private school, acutely aware of his worn-out shoes and the faint scent of grease from his father's mechanic shop that clung to his clothes. He remembered the sting of being looked down upon, the quiet condescension of the wealthy parents, and the burning vow he had made to himself that one day he would be the one looking down. He had built his entire life as a fortress against that shame, but he now realized that in the process he had become the very gatekeeper who had once made him feel so small and worthless. He saw in Elena's quiet dignity everything he had sacrificed for his ambition. The conversation deepened, stretching past midnight as the city lights twinkled below. Julian asked her about the half-dozen languages she spoke, about the etymology of certain words, about the cultural subtleties in his grandmother's letter. Elena, finally able to share the knowledge she had kept locked away for years, spoke with a quiet passion that mesmerized him. For the first time in years, Julian wasn't networking, negotiating, or delegating. He was simply learning. An unspoken understanding formed between them, a fragile bridge built across the vast chasm of their different lives, connected by the shared experience of being profoundly underestimated. When he offered her a fresh cup of coffee, the simple human gesture felt more meaningful than any bonus he had ever awarded. The next morning, Julian called an emergency all-hands meeting. The atmosphere was thick with tension and speculation. Standing before his entire company, he did something no one had ever seen him do. He admitted he had made a grave error in judgment. He then introduced Elena Nowak, not as a cleaner, but as the company's newest and most vital asset. He announced the creation of a new role specifically for her, Senior Advisor for Global Strategy and Cultural Linguistics. The announcement was met with a wave of stunned silence, quickly followed by whispers of disbelief and thinly veiled resentment. The rigid corporate hierarchy had been upended, and the people who benefited from it were not pleased. The backlash was immediate and insidious. Marcus Thorne led the charge, subtly undermining Elena at every opportunity. He would accidentally leave her off crucial email chains, schedule important follow-up meetings when he knew she was unavailable, and make condescending remarks disguised as helpful suggestions. He spoke to other executives in hushed tones about the risks of bringing in someone with no real-world business experience. It wasn't overt insubordination. It was a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts designed to isolate her and prove to Julian that his sentimental decision was a mistake. The message from the executive team was clear. She was an outsider who did not belong in their world. Elena felt the chill of their exclusion, a familiar cold that seeped into her bones. She was once again on the outside looking in, her worth being constantly challenged by people who refused to see past her former uniform. The expensive business attire Julian had provided felt like a costume, and the gleaming office he had given her felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. Yet she refused to be intimidated. The years of being invisible had forged in her a quiet, resilient strength. She knew that arguing or complaining would only confirm their prejudices. Instead, she focused on her work with an unwavering, meticulous dedication. knowing that her only path to acceptance was to prove her value so undeniably that even her most ardent detractors would be forced to acknowledge it. The breaking point arrived a month later, during a crisis that threatened the very foundation of Apex Innovations. A $50 million partnership with a hyper-traditional Japanese tech conglomerate was crumbling. Weeks of negotiations had stalled, snarled in a web of cultural missteps and communication failures. The final video conference was a disaster in the making. The air in the boardroom was thick with the metallic scent of fear and stale coffee. Julian's team, led by a visibly sweating Marcus Thorne, had just committed a profound cultural blunder, their aggressive Western-style negotiation tactics being interpreted as a deep insult. On the massive screen, the face of the Japanese investor, Mr. Tanaka, was a mask of cold, impenetrable politeness. The deal was dead, and everyone in the room knew it. The silence was the sound of a massive opportunity turning to dust. It was in that moment of absolute desperation that Julian made a decision that defied all corporate logic. He turned to his assistant and spoke a quiet, firm command. "Get Elena, now." A ripple of disbelief and contempt washed over his executive team. Marcus Thorne looked as if he'd been slapped, his expression a mixture of outrage and panic. To bring a former janitor into a negotiation of this magnitude was not just unconventional, it was professional suicide. Yet, when Elena entered the room, dressed in a simple but elegant business suit, she carried an aura of unshakable calm. She moved with the same quiet grace she had in her old uniform, her eyes taking in the tense faces and the grim image on the screen. Julian ignored the mutinous glares of his team and gestured to a seat beside him. It was a gamble born not of strategy, but of a desperate, newfound faith. The attempt to restart the conversation was painful. Julian's team offered clumsy apologies that only deepened the offense. Mr. Tanaka was preparing his final, polite refusal when Eleanor leaned toward the microphone. "Tanaka-san," she began, her voice soft but clear. Her Japanese was flawless, not just linguistically perfect, but imbued with the deep, formal respect required for such an exchange. The investor's eyes widened in surprise. Eleanor did not address the deal directly. Instead, she quoted a classic Japanese proverb about how one must understand the roots of a tree to appreciate the strength of its branches, subtly acknowledging their company's heritage and wisdom. She spoke for less than a minute, but in that short time, she built a bridge of understanding across a chasm of cultural ignorance, single-handedly disarming the tension and restoring honor to the conversation. The shift in the room was seismic. On the screen, Mr. Tanaka's severe expression softened, replaced by a slow, genuine smile. He responded to Elena, and a brief, respectful dialogue ensued. The deal was not only saved, it was strengthened, founded now on a bedrock of genuine mutual respect. After the call ended with a confirmed partnership, the boardroom was silent. The relief was palpable, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of shame that hung in the air. Julian rose from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look at the signed contract or the glowing profit projections. He turned to face his entire team, but his eyes were fixed on Eleanor. "I've spent years scouting talent, paying fortunes. For Ivy League degrees," he began, his voice raw and stripped of all its usual authority, "and the most brilliant mind I've ever met was right here, cleaning my floors." He took a step closer, ensuring every person in that room felt the weight of his next words. The mask of the CEO was gone, leaving only the man, vulnerable and exposed. "The fault wasn't that you were invisible," he said, his voice thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. "The fault was that I was blind. I am truly sorry." The apology landed with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just an apology to Elena. It was a confession to everyone, a public dismantling of the arrogant, results-obsessed culture he had so meticulously built. In that moment, Julian Vance didn't just close a $50 million deal. He reclaimed a piece of his own soul, overcoming the deep-seated fear of vulnerability that had imprisoned him for decades. For Elena, it was not a moment of triumph, but one of quiet, profound justice, a silent validation that resonated more powerfully than any applause ever could. The apology hung in the air, a cleansing fire that burned away years of toxic corporate culture. In the days that followed, Julian's words proved to be more than just a momentary lapse into emotion. They were a mission statement. He officially announced the creation of the Human Potential Division, a department with a revolutionary mandate to discover and cultivate the untapped talents of every single employee, from the mailroom to the executive suite. Elena Nowak was named its director. The initial shock among the staff gave way to a cautious optimism. For the first time, company-wide memos spoke of tuition reimbursement programs, language courses, and mentorship opportunities. The brushed steel and cold glass of the office began to feel a little warmer, as if the building itself could finally breathe. It was a seismic shift, a company rebuilding its foundation not on profit margins, but on the radical idea that its greatest assets had been there all along, just waiting to be seen. Elena embraced her new role with the same quiet dignity she had brought to her old one. Her office, with its panoramic view of the city, became a sanctuary for those who had long felt invisible. She didn't manage with spreadsheets or directives, she managed with empathy. She spent her days listening, learning the stories of security guards who were also gifted artists, receptionists who coded in their spare time, and maintenance workers who held degrees in engineering from their home countries. She implemented a second chance program that provided resources to validate foreign credentials and offered paid apprenticeships. Elena became a sought-after speaker, not as a corporate guru, but as a storyteller, sharing her journey and reminding audiences everywhere that human value is not determined by a uniform or a job title. She wasn't just building a corporate division, she was restoring lost identities, one person at a time. Julian, in turn, found a purpose far more fulfilling than market domination. He used the inheritance from his grandmother, the very catalyst for this profound change, to establish the Nowak Vance Foundation. Its mission was simple, yet ambitious: to provide legal aid, language training, and career placement for refugees and immigrants struggling to rebuild their lives. He often worked late into the evening alongside Elena, poring over applications, not as a CEO, analyzing assets, but as a man reconnecting with his own roots. The memory of his grandmother's kitchen, once a painful reminder of what he had lost, now became a source of strength. He was no longer just Julie, the boy who felt small, or Julian Vance, the titan of industry. He was becoming a bridge between those two worlds, finally understanding that true wealth was measured in the lives you could lift up. 3 years later, the view from the 60th floor had not changed, but the people looking out had. Apex Innovations was more profitable than ever, a testament to a culture that now thrived on collaboration and respect. Julian and Elena often stood by the vast window, not looking down on the city as a kingdom to be conquered, but as a community of millions of untold stories. One afternoon, a complex legal document arrived, written in a rare dialect of Farsi. An assistant began to panic, but Julian simply smiled. "Let's check with our logistics team," he said calmly. "Maria in shipping is from Tehran. You never know where genius is hiding." His words were the quiet legacy of one woman's courage, a powerful reminder that seeing the true worth in others is the most valuable investment of all. Stories like this deserve a platform, and by subscribing, you help us ensure they continue to be shared and heard.